Jax adjusted his crimson tie, the cheap fabric scratching against his skin. It was a nervous habit, one he'd picked up during countless poker games in smoky backrooms across the Outer Rim. Tonight, though, the stakes were higher than any pot he'd ever chased. He owed Torvin, a hulking crime lord with a penchant for collecting debts in inventive and painful ways, Jax's plan. A high-stakes card game aboard Torvin's private casino ship, the Gilded Cage. He swaggered through the opulent corridors, flashing a practiced smile at the various lowlifes and pleasure-seekers who populated the vessel. The air hung thick with the scent of expensive perfumes, illicit substances, and desperation. Jax knew he was walking a tightrope. Win big, and he'd be free of Torvin's clutches. Lose, and well, he didn't want to think about that. The card room was a sensory overload. Holographic dancers shimmered in the corners, casting kaleidoscopic patterns on the velvet walls. The low hum of the energy shields kept the prying eyes of space at bay. Jax spotted Torvin at the head of the table, his reptilian eyes gleaming in the dim light. Flanking him were two of his enforcers, brutes who looked like they'd been carved from granite. "Jax," Torvin rumbled, his voice a gravelly growl that sent a shiver down Jax's spine. "Glad you could make it. I trust you have an offering for the table." Jax slapped a data chip onto the table, its surface glinting. "Intel. Valuable intel. Location of a hidden cache of xylose crystals. Enough to cover my debt, and then some." Torvin raised a scaled eyebrow. "Intriguing. Let's see if your luck matches your information." The game began. Jax was a master of deception, his face an unreadable mask as he calculated the odds, bluffed his opponents, and slowly, painstakingly, began to win. The pile of credits in front of him grew, fueled by daring bets and well-timed bluffs. He could feel Torvin's gaze boring into him, the crime lord's frustration palpable. But Jax knew that Torvin wouldn't let him win easily. As the night wore on, the stakes grew higher, and the atmosphere became increasingly tense. Torvin started bending the rules, subtly at first, then more overtly. The dealer, a nervous Rhodian, was clearly in Torvin's pocket, dealing favorable hands to the crime lord and sabotaging Jax's chances. Jax realized he needed to change tactics. He couldn't beat Torvin at his own game. He needed leverage, something that Torvin wanted more than credits. That's when he remembered the rumors he'd heard circulating in the lower decks of the Gilded Cage. Whispers of a secret cargo, something far more valuable than any gem or spice. Using a well-timed excuse, Jax slipped away from the table, his heart pounding in his chest. He navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the ship, relying on his instincts and the fragmented information he'd gleaned from drunken spacers. He finally reached a restricted section, sealed off by a heavy security door. He bypassed the electronic lock with a small device hidden in his sleeve, a skill he learned during his less-than-savory youth. The door hissed open, revealing a dimly lit storage bay. Crates lined the walls, their contents obscured by faded labels. In the center of the room, however, was a large reinforced cage. Inside, huddled in a corner, was a creature unlike anything Jax had ever seen. It was vaguely humanoid, but its skin was covered in iridescent feathers, shimmering with every color imaginable. Large, avian eyes, filled with a deep sadness, stared out from behind the bars. It was an aviarian, a species thought to be extinct, rumored to possess extraordinary powers. Torvin was keeping it prisoner, likely to sell it to the highest bidder. Jax felt a surge of anger, a flicker of humanity in his usually cynical heart. He couldn't leave it here. It was a risky move, one that could cost him his life, but he knew what he had to do. He disabled the cage's locking mechanism and gently coaxed the aviarian out. It was weak and frightened, but it responded to his soft voice and outstretched hand. He wrapped it in a cloak he'd taken from a nearby crate, concealing its exotic plumage. "Don't worry," he whispered. "I'm getting you out of here." He led the aviarian back towards the card room, intending to confront Torvin and use its existence as leverage to settle his debt. But as they rounded a corner, they were ambushed by Torvin's enforcers. "Looking for something, gambler," one of them sneered, raising a blaster. Jax knew he was outgunned. He drew his own blaster, but it was a cheap model, no match for the enforcers' heavy weaponry. He had one chance. "I have something Torvin wants," he shouted, pushing the aviarian forward. "Something he's been keeping secret, something very valuable." The enforcers hesitated, their eyes widening as they caught sight of the aviarian. Jax could see the gears turning in their heads. They knew they couldn't kill him without Torvin's permission, not if he held something so valuable. "Take him to Torvin," the lead enforcer growled. "And bring it." Jax had bought himself some time, but he knew that Torvin wouldn't be happy. He was walking into the lion's den, but he had no choice. He had to protect the aviarian, even if it meant sacrificing himself. His life as a gambler had been filled with empty wins and fleeting pleasures. Maybe, just maybe, this act of defiance could give it some meaning. The guard escorted them into the game room. Torvin turned towards them with face like thunder. "What is the meaning of this, Jax?" "I had intel, sir," the guard said. "It looks like it was planning to escape with this bird like alien," Torvin smirked. "Is that true, Jax?" Jax smirked back, "Yes. But sir, I do think we can do something more valuable with this thing." Torvin smiled. "I am all ears." Jax continued, "This bird, alien or whatever it is, may be valuable, but you can sell it to a buyer for one time. If you make a deal with me, I will take it to its home." "For you?" Torvin was interested. "Why should I trust you?" Jax looked deeply into his eyes and said, "Because you have no other choice." Derek frowned. "Your blood." He leaned forward, intrigued, and slightly apprehensive. Sarah's, still hesitant, met his gaze. It has properties. Unique properties. It can accelerate healing, enhance abilities. It's valuable to certain organizations." Her voice was barely audible, but the weight of her words hung heavy in the small cabin. Organizations. That was putting it mildly. Derek imagined shadowy corporations, ruthless governments, and every other power-hungry entity in the galaxy lining up to get their hands on Sarah's blood. He whistled softly. "Well, that explains the dog cage. So what exactly are we talking about here?" "Super strength. Healing factor. Do you sprout wings and fly?" Sarah's managed a faint smile, the first genuine expression he'd seen from her. "Not wings, but other things. My people, we were healers, empaths. We could manipulate energy, both within ourselves and in others." "Were." Derek picked up on the past tense. "What happened?" Her eyes clouded over, and she looked away. "They came. They wanted our gifts. We refused. They destroyed everything." Derek didn't press her further. He could fill in the blanks. Genocide, enslavement, exploitation. It was a familiar story in the Outer Rim, where the strong preyed on the weak without mercy. "All right, so you're a walking miracle cure with empathic powers." "That's a lot to unpack. No wonder Corvin wanted you. But what does he plan to do with you? Sell you off piece by piece?" "Probably," Saras said tonelessly. "Or worse, experiment on me. Extract my blood until I'm empty." Derek slammed his fist on the table, rattling the ration packs. "That's not happening. Not on my watch." He stood up and paced the small cabin, his mind racing. He needed a plan, and fast. Corvin wouldn't give up easily, and with Saras' blood as the prize, he'd pull out all the stops. "We need to disappear," Derek said, more to himself than to Saras. "Change our identities, get off the grid, find somewhere safe." "Where?" Saras asked, her voice laced with doubt. "Where is there safety for someone like me?" Derek stopped pacing and looked at her. He didn't have an answer. He was a smuggler, not a savior. He knew how to evade the law, not protect endangered species, But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was responsible for her now. He'd opened that cage, and he couldn't just abandon her. I know a guy, Derek said hesitantly. A mechanic. She's resourceful, and she owes me a favor. Maybe she can help us get a new ship, a new identity. A mechanic. Sarah's raised an eyebrow. You trust her? Trust is a luxury I can't afford, Derek said wryly. But she's the best I know. And she hates Corvin as much as I do. He accessed the ship's comm system and patched through a secure channel. A grainy image flickered onto the screen, resolving into the face of a woman with grease-stained hair and a cynical expression. Well, she said, her voice raspy. If it isn't Derek Carter. Long time no see. What kind of trouble are you in now? Rena, Derek said, forcing a smile. Always a pleasure. I need your help. I'm in a bit of a situation. A situation, huh? That usually translates to I'm broke, wanted by the law, and carrying something I shouldn't be. Am I close? Close enough, Derek admitted. I need a new ship, Rena. Something fast, something discreet. And maybe some modifications. Rena narrowed her eyes, her gaze hardening. What are you carrying, Derek? And don't give me any of your usual bullshit. Derek hesitated. He didn't want to involve Rena in this mess, but he had no choice. It's complicated. Let's just say it's a package that Corvin wants very badly. Rena swore under her breath. Corvin. You messed with Corvin. You idiot. That man is a walking disaster. I know, Derek said impatiently. But I couldn't leave her. She was being mistreated. Rena's expression softened slightly. Her. It's a girl. What's she done? Steal his stash of spice? Not exactly, Derek said. She's special. And Corvin wants to exploit her. Rena was silent for a moment, considering. All right, Derek. You've always been a soft touch. But this is going to cost you. Big time. Name your price, Derek said, relieved. I want that favor you owe me, Rena said. The one you promised you'd never ask for. Derek's stomach dropped. That favor was a big one, a dangerous one. It involved smuggling a shipment of restricted tech through a heavily guarded blockade. He'd been hoping to never have to call it in. Rena, he protested. That's not fair. This is just a ship. This is Corvin we're talking about, Rena said, her voice firm. He'll burn this whole sector to the ground to get what he wants. This isn't just a ship, Derek. This is a war, and I'm not getting involved unless I get something out of it. Derek sighed. He was trapped. He had no choice. Fine, he said reluctantly. You have your favor, but you have to promise me you'll protect her. She's been through enough. I'm not making any promises, Rena said, but I'll do what I can. Get your ship to my junkyard on Nar Shaddaa. And Derek, be careful. Corvin won't hesitate to kill you both. The transmission ended, leaving Derek staring at the blank screen. He'd just made a deal with the devil, but he bought himself and Saris a chance. Nar Shaddaa, the smuggler's moon, was a dangerous place, but it was also a place where you could disappear. If they could survive long enough to reach Rena, they might just have a chance to start over. He turned to Saris, who had been listening intently to the conversation. Nar Shaddaa, he said. Ever been? Saris shook her head. I've never been anywhere. Except the cage. Derek felt a pang of sympathy for her. He couldn't imagine what it must be like to be confined for so long, to be treated like an animal. He was determined to give her a better life, even if it meant risking his own. Well, get ready, he said, forcing a smile. Nar Shaddaa is an experience. Just try not to get your pockets picked. He fired up the ship's engines and plotted a course for the smuggler's moon. As they jumped into hyperspace, Derek couldn't shake the feeling that they were heading into the eye of the storm. Corvin wouldn't let them go that easily, and Nar Shaddaa was a place where anything could happen. But he had Saris now, and he wasn't going to let her down. He'd face Corvin, the dangers of Marshada, and anything else the galaxy threw at them. He owed her that much. His life as a smuggler may have just been changed forever. The sound of boots echoed on the metal floor as they walked. Yes, but I'm not going to allow you to have to sneak every time you want to have something. He pointed to one of the guard. You, go grab some clothes for our new friend. The guard nodded and went away. Here, sit down, Jax ordered. Thank you, Lyra responded with a weak smile on his face. After a few minutes of talking, the door opened. The guard came back with a pile of clothes. Lyra, a name Jax was growing used to, looked around Durek's cockpit. It was cramped, functional, and smelled faintly of engine grease and stale coffee. But it was safe for now. So, what happens now? She asked, her voice still tentative. Where do we go? Jax was glad she'd asked. He'd been wrestling with that question ever since they'd escaped the gilded cage. He couldn't just wander aimlessly through the galaxy, dodging Torvin's wrath. He needed a plan, a safe haven, and someone he could trust. I have an idea, Jax said, leaning back in his chair. There's a neutral space station called Haven. It's run by a council of independent factions. They pride themselves on their neutrality and their willingness to offer sanctuary to anyone in need. Lyra's eyes widened. Sanctuary? You mean they would protect me? That's the idea, Jax said. But it's not a guarantee. Haven is a political minefield. Every faction has its own agenda, and they're not always willing to play nice. We'll need to tread carefully. He brought up a holographic map of the sector, highlighting Haven's location. It was a small, unassuming station, orbiting a gas giant on the edge of known space. But it was strategically important, serving as a crossroads for trade routes and a meeting place for diplomats from across the galaxy. The key to Haven is Counselor Morian, Jax explained. He's the head of the council, and he's known for his integrity and his commitment to justice. If we can convince him to take our side, we might have a chance. But why would he help us? Lyra asked. He doesn't know us. He doesn't owe us anything. Morian is an idealist, Jax said. He believes in doing what's right, even when it's difficult. And I have a feeling he'll see that protecting you is the right thing to do. He contacted the guard and said, "Thank you, you may go now." Jax turned back at Lyra. "Here you can change in the bathroom. After that I can take you to a shop where you can find your taste and style." Jax had one last idea. "Well, I know someone who I can trust to do this," he said, smiling. Lyra smiled back. "Then we should ask her." Jax nodded. "Then you should know we can talk to her by the communicator. And she is currently on space, doing her job. She is a mechanic named Rena." "Well, let's give her a call," Lyra said, curious. Jax contacted the Rena. "Hello there, Rena, are you there? It's been a long time." Rena answered, "Jax, is that you? I have no time for this. I am working right now, so please make it fast." Jax said back, "Well, I have an important thing for you. We are currently on a safe place, and there is no danger here, so you can talk, because I am with a friend." Rena said, "All right then, who is that?" "I don't have friends in this job." Jax turned back at Lyra and said, "Well, it is the time for you to shine." Lyra moved to the cam and said, "Hello, my name is Lyra." "Nice to meet you." Rena was shocked, staring at the screen. "An aviarian. I thought they were extinct." Rena exclaimed, her eyes wide with surprise. "What in the galaxy is going on, Jax?" "It's a long story," Jax said. "But the short version is that I rescued Lyra from Corvin, and now we need a safe place to hide. I was hoping you could help us get to Haven. I have someone who is working in Haven." Rena frowned. "Haven? That's a long shot, Jax. The Council is notoriously cautious. They won't risk their neutrality for just anyone." "I know," Jax said. "But I have a feeling Counselor Morian will be sympathetic to Lyra's plight. He's a good man, Rena. He'll do what's right." Rena was silent for a moment, considering. All right, Jax. I'll help you get to Haven, but don't expect me to hold your hand. I have my own problems to deal with. I wouldn't expect anything less, Jax said, relieved. Just get us close enough, and we'll take it from there. Rena gave him the coordinates for a hidden docking bay on the outskirts of Haven Station. Be careful, Jax, she said. Haven is a viper's nest. Don't trust anyone. The transmission ended, and Jax turned to Lyra. All right, we have a plan. Rena is going to get us close to Haven, and then we're on our own. Are you ready for this? Lyra took a deep breath. I have to be, she said. I don't have any other choice. Jax set a course for Haven, his mind racing. He knew they were walking into a dangerous situation, but he was determined to protect Lyra, no matter the cost. He'd faced long odds before, and he'd always found a way to come out on top. But this time, it wasn't just about him. It was about giving Lyra a chance at a new life, a life free from fear and oppression. As they approached Haven Station, Jax could feel the tension in the air. The station was a sprawling complex of interconnected modules, each representing a different faction or corporation. The docking bays were bustling with activity, as ships from across the galaxy arrived and departed, carrying goods, passengers, and secrets. Rena guided them to the hidden docking bay, a small, unmarked platform tucked away in a remote corner of the station. Good luck, Jax, she said, as they prepared to disembark. You're going to need it. Jax and Lyra stepped out of the ship and onto the platform. The air was cold and thin, and the silence was unnerving. They were alone, with no idea where to go or who to trust. All right, Jax said, trying to sound confident. Let's find Counselor Morian and see if we can convince him to help us. They made their way through the labyrinthine corridors of the station, trying to blend in with the crowds of spacers and diplomats. Jax kept his hand close to his blaster, ready for trouble. He knew that Torvin's reach extended far beyond the gilded cage, and he wouldn't be surprised if the crime lord had agents on Haven Station. As they approached the council chambers, they were stopped by two heavily armed guards. Halt, one of them said, his voice cold and mechanical. State your business. Jax took a deep breath. This was it. We're here to see Counselor Morian, he said. It's a matter of urgent importance. The guard scrutinized them for a moment. His eyes narrowed. Counselor Morian is a busy man. He doesn't see just anyone who walks in off the street. Tell him it's about an aviarian refugee, Jax said. Tell him her name is Lyra. The guard hesitated, then nodded to his partner. The second guard disappeared into the council chambers, leaving Jax and Lyra standing alone in the corridor. The minutes stretched on, each one feeling like an eternity. Jax could feel Lyra trembling beside him, her fear palpable. He put his arm around her, trying to offer some comfort. Finally, the second guard returned. Counselor Morian will see you now, he said. But be warned, he doesn't like to have his time wasted. Jax and Lyra exchanged a nervous glance, then followed the guard into the council chambers. Their fate hung in the balance. The next few minutes would determine whether they found sanctuary on Haven, or whether they were cast back into the darkness. Inside the council chambers, Counselor Morian sat at the head of a long, ornate table. He was an older man, with a kind face and piercing blue eyes. He looked at Jax and Lyra with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Please sit, he said, gesturing to two chairs in front of the table. I understand you have something to tell me about an aviarian refugee named Lyra. Kellen adjusted the scope of his rifle, the cold metal biting into his gloved hand. The wind howled across the desolate plains of Oris IV, carrying with it the scent of dust and decay. He'd been tracking Direct Carter for days, following the faint trail of his ship, the Nomad. Carter was a slippery one, but Callan was patient. He always got his mark. His contract was simple: retrieve the cargo Carter had stolen from Corvin and deliver it to the buyer on Oris IV. No questions asked. Callan didn't care what the cargo was. He was a bounty hunter, not a moral crusader. He got paid to find people and bring them in. That's all that mattered. But as he'd gotten closer to Carter, he'd started to hear whispers, rumors about the cargo. It wasn't just some valuable artifact or stolen technology. It was a living being, an aviarian woman named Lyra, and Corvin wanted her back, badly. Kalen had seen aviarians before, in zoos and circuses, paraded around like exotic animals. He'd never given them much thought. They were just another species struggling to survive in a galaxy that didn't care about them. But something about this situation felt different. The urgency in Corvin's voice, the secrecy surrounding Lyra, it made Kalen uneasy. He spotted the nomad in the distance, nestled in a rocky canyon. Carter was holed up, probably waiting for a ride off-world. Kalen checked his weapons, his pulse quickening. It was time to finish this. He moved silently through the canyon, using the shadows and the uneven terrain to his advantage. He reached the edge of the canyon and peered down at the nomad. Carter was outside, tinkering with the ship's engines. Lyra was nowhere to be seen. Kalen raised his rifle, aiming for Carter's head. He squeezed the trigger, but at the last moment, he hesitated. He lowered the rifle, his hand trembling. He couldn't do it. He couldn't kill Carter. Not without knowing the truth about Lyra. He holstered his rifle and jumped down into the canyon, landing softly behind Carter. "Don't move," he said, his voice low and menacing. "I don't want to hurt you." Carter spun around, his hand reaching for his blaster. "Who are you?" he demanded. "What do you want?" "I'm Kalen," he said. "I'm a bounty hunter. I'm here for Lyra." Carter's eyes narrowed. "You're working for Corvin." "I was," Kalen said. "But I need to know something. What is Lyra? Why does Corvin want her so badly?" Carter hesitated, then sighed. "It's a long story," he said, "but the short version is that Lyra is an aviarian healer. Her blood has powerful regenerative properties. Corvin wants to exploit her, sell her blood to the highest bidder." Kalen felt a surge of anger. He'd suspected as much. Corvin was a monster, willing to do anything for money. And Kalen had been helping him. "Where is she?" Kalen asked, his voice hardening. "She's inside the ship," Carter said. "But I won't let you take her. I'll die before I let Corvin get his hands on her." Kalen nodded. "I believe you," he said. "That's why I'm not going to take her. I'm going to help you protect her." Carter stared at him, his eyes wide with disbelief. "You're going to help us? Why?" "Because I'm done working for people like Corvin," Kalen said. "I'm done being a pawn in their games. I want to do something good for once." He extended his hand to Carter. "I can help you get Lyra to safety. I know people who can protect her, people who will appreciate her for who she is, not for what she can do." Carter hesitated, then shook Kalen's hand. "All right," he said. "I trust you. But if you betray me, I'll kill you myself." "Fair enough," Kalen said. "Let's get Lyra and get out of here. Corvin's not going to give up easily." They went inside the Nomad and found Lyra huddled in a corner, her eyes filled with fear. Kalen knelt down in front of her, speaking softly. "Lyra," he said, "my name is Kalen. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm going to help you get to safety." Lyra looked at him, her expression hesitant. "You're not with Corvin?" she asked. "No," Kalen said. "I'm with Durek. We're going to protect you." Lyra nodded, then stood up and took Kalen's hand. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. Kalen led Lyra and Carter out of the Nomad and towards his ship, a sleek, black vessel hidden behind a nearby ridge. "We're going to a place called Haven," Kalen said. "It's a neutral space station, run by a council of independent factions. They offer sanctuary to anyone in need." "Haven," Lyra said, her eyes lighting up. "I've heard of it. It's supposed to be a safe place." "It is," Kalen said, "but we're not there yet. Corvin's men are still out there. We need to be careful." They reached Kalen's ship and climbed aboard. Kalen fired up the engines and took off, heading towards Haven Station. As they soared through the atmosphere, Kalen looked back at Lyra, her face illuminated by the glow of the stars. He knew he was doing the right thing. He was helping someone in need, and he was finally breaking free from the cycle of violence and exploitation that had defined his life. But he also knew that their journey was far from over. Corvin wouldn't let them go that easily. He would come after them, and he would stop at nothing to get Lyra back. Kalen was ready for him. He would protect Lyra, even if it meant sacrificing his own life. He owed her that much. As they approached Haven Station, Kalen contacted Counselor Morden, the head of the council. "I have an Aviarian refugee seeking sanctuary," he said. "Her name is Lyra. She's being hunted by a dangerous criminal named Corvin." Morian's voice came back, calm and reassuring. "We've been expecting you," he said. "Haven offers sanctuary to all who seek it. Bring Lyra to the council chambers. We will ensure her safety." Kalen landed his ship in a secure docking bay and escorted Lyra and Carter to the council chambers. Morian greeted them warmly, his eyes filled with compassion. "Welcome to Haven," he said. "You are safe here. We will protect you from Corvin and anyone else who seeks to harm you." Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with hope. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Kalen smiled back. He'd done it. He'd helped Lyra find sanctuary. He'd finally found a purpose in his life, a reason to keep fighting. But as he looked out at the stars, he knew that his journey was just beginning. He would stay on Haven, protecting Lyra and helping others in need. He would use his skills to make the galaxy a better place, one rescue at a time. He was no longer a bounty hunter. He was a protector, a savior, and he wouldn't have it any other way.